What's up guys, welcome back to another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. In today's blueprint tutorial, I will show you how to script an interactive elevator system. I'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll jump into the fundamentals of the logic that's happening. If you follow along, you should be able to expect to replicate this sort of functionality. We have a series of interactive elevators, which can move vertically, horizontally, realistically in any direction you want, and use one or multiple buttons to cause the elevator to move along its track. All right, awesome. Let's jump into an explanation of how this works. So the way we're going to implement the logic is that the player will overlap a button, and the button, if the elevator is not already in progress, will show, and the player can press a button on their keyboard or controller to communicate from the button to the elevator, and then the elevator will start moving along its specified track. All right, let's jump into the engine. Okay, you can start off by opening up a new or existing level. And in our content drawer, first we will create a series of assets. I will right click and first make a new blueprint class of type actor. And I will call this BP_moving elevator. I'll right click again, create another blueprint class of type actor. We'll call this BP_elevator call button. I'll right click one more time and go under the blueprint tab to blueprint interface. And I will call this BPI_button press interaction. So the relationship of these is as follows. The interface will be integrated into the character, the call button, and the elevator. The call button is the thing that you see here, which will be the little podium that has a little indicator of whether or not the elevator can be called. The elevator itself is the moving platform, as well as it contains some references to where the podium will end. And that is all. So let's start with our blueprint interface. So I'll double click to open it up, and we're going to add 3 functions. We'll rename the first function in the top right, and we'll call this character interact with world object. So we're going to place this function only on the character. I'm going to add a new function. We'll call this podium communicate with elevator. And I'd recommend that you just name the things as I name them. So that goes for variables, blueprints, and functions, just so it's easy to follow along. I'll add one more, and I'll call this elevator underscore communicate with podium. And because this is an interface, we'd expect that, if we were using this as our interaction interface, we might use more generalized names, but in this situation, we're going to use names that are specific to the blueprints we're working with, so it's very easy to understand. Okay, and now we will add on our second function, the podium communicate with elevator. We will add an input, and we will call this podium. We'll call this podium reference, and I will change the type to actor and make this an object reference. Compile. Then I'll go to this third function. I will add an input. And I will call this is in progress, question mark. And then we're going to change this to a Boolean. I'll compile, I'll save. Okay, now let's add some functionality to our call button. I will double click to open up my elevator call button. And we will add 3 components. We will add in the top left in the components panel a cube. We will add a billboard. And we will add a sphere collision. The sphere collision is what will allow us to overlap the object and then allow us later to interact. The billboard is going to be the icon that says you can or cannot interact. And then the cube is going to be the little pedestal that the icon sits on top of. So we'll set our scale to 0.5, 0.5, 1, And then we will change the Z value of the location to 50 so that it sits on top of the floor. Now, for the sphere collision, we'll give this a radius in the details panel of 250. And then we'll set the location to 150. We'll grab our billboard and we will attach it to the sphere. And then we will zero out the location in the top right so that it sits in the center of the sphere and on top of the pedestal. We're going to use an editor texture. It's one that already exists in the game. You can use your own if you'd like. But I'm going to use this one. It is called mat_groups_anim. I'm only using it because it's a play. It looks like a sort of play button. And honestly, there's not a lot of great images by default in the engine. So I'm going to change the scale of this to 555 so it's visible. And this is what will let us know when an interaction is or is not available. All right. Before we keep going, this is very important. In the details panel, search hidden in game. Sprites are by default hidden in game. And for the way we're going to use it, we're going to make sure that it's not so that we can see it. So let's start off in our event graph. We will, on event begin play, get our billboard, and we will say set visibility is false so that in the very beginning it will hide it and then re-show it when we overlap it. So let's first right click our sphere collision and say add event on component begin overlap, and then right click again and say add on component end overlap. So we're going to pull off of our other actor for the begin overlap and say cast to character. We're going to basically test, is the overlapping actor a character? And if it is, we're going to then set the visibility of the billboard to be on. So I'll grab this, say set visibility is true, and like this. And realistically, what we're going to do is use this exact same chunk of logic. So we're going to turn this into a function. So we're going to collapse to function, say test for character, and set visibility. And we're going to double click into here. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag this in there and compile. And we're going to copy this. We're going to Control C, Control V this right here, because we're really going to perform the same check on end overlap. So when we enter, we're going to say, are you a character? If so, show it here and hide it here. So this is going to be where our overlap happens. And I will select this, press C, and type overlap to add a comment for our overlap logic. Now let's add some logic for where our character communicates with the podium. So we're going to go up to class settings, and under interfaces, we're going to add an interface. So right here where it says add, I'm going to say BPI_button press interaction. And it will give us in the bottom left access to the functions that we've added in our blueprint interface. So all three of these we now have access to right here on the left. So I'm going to first use the character interact with podium, or with world object. And so when the character calls to this blueprint using this function, we will execute the following logic. So I'll pull off here and say branch, and I'm going to pull off here and promote this to variable and say allow interaction, question mark. And then I'm going to add another variable type, and this will be where we create a reference to our elevator. So I'll call this elevator reference, and I'll make this of type actor. Go to object reference. I'll drag this off onto my graph, say get elevator reference. And what we're going to do is actually called a validated get. So I'll right click and say convert to validated get. This is the same as is valid, like this. So we're just going to do the validated get. So if interaction is allowed, we'll get our reference, and then we're going to use our blueprint interaction function, podium communicate with elevator, to communicate with that. So I'll drag off here and say podium communicate with elevator. And we want to make sure we're using the one under our BPI button press interaction. So I'm going to use this one, podium communicate with elevator. It will set the elevator as the target, and then we'll pull off podium reference and say reference to self. Because at the end of the process run on the elevator, we'll want to communicate back up to the podium and pass on some information. So I'll add a comment around this, and this will say called from character, then communicate to podium. Or we'll say then communicate to elevator. So let's first just add this function on our character because I know we're going to want to see that. So I'm going to use the third person character here. So I'm just going to search that in my content drawer. Open up my BP third person character. And I'm going to right click in this graph and say keyboard. And we're going to use the keyboard E key. So scroll down and click that. So anytime this is pressed, what we're going to do is, if you recall, that we have a sphere on this, which, as long as the collision settings are proper, which they should spawn in by default as overlap all dynamic, which includes pawn and generate overlaps. In our graph, if we add the logic get overlapping actors of type actor, if we walk over and overlap with this elevator call button, it will appear in this array. So now what I can do is I can say for each loop on this. So when I press the E key, it will get the reference to all the overlapping actors that my character is overlapping. And then I can say, call this event that we've created here, which is the event character interact with world object. So I'll drag this off here, or I'll right click and I'll say event character. Actually, I'll do this here. Event character interact with world object. So I'm going to click this here that says BPI button press interaction. And it's going to fire off this blueprint interface event. And if you recall, this will not do anything if the object does not inherit from that interface. So if you read the message, it says this does nothing if the overlapped object does not use that interface, which is great. So no harm, no foul. I'll add a comment and say press E to interact. Awesome. Now let's go add some logic on our elevator. First, let's just briefly refresh. I press E. It's going to call this interact function on any overlapped actors that have the interface. In this situation, the expected overlap actor will be our call button. And when we call this event, which is the one from the character, so it's going to call it from here, from the character, it's going to then get a reference to this podium, the little call button, and it's going to say, are you available for interaction? Which in the beginning will always be true, and we'll set that in the beginning. But allow interaction is true, get the elevator, and then we're going to kick off the move up or move down logic in the elevator. So now let's add that. Okay, let's go to our BP underscore moving elevator. I'll double click, and we're going to add a series of components. So I'm going to add a scene component. A scene is effectively just a location object that I oftentimes use to attach other things to. It is just a scene transform. So it has that description right there. So I will add, while this is selected so that it automatically attaches, I will add a cube. And I'm going to actually duplicate this with Control D, and I'll do that twice. I will call this base platform. I will call this rail underscore left. I will call this rail underscore right. And I'm using the F2 key on my keyboard to easily rename these. So you can either right click and say rename, or you can hit F2. I like to use F2. And then I'm going to duplicate the scene component. So I'll duplicate this and say start platform location. I'll duplicate this one more time with Control D while it's selected and say end platform location. And then we're going to edit some of these values right now. So while my base platform is selected, I'm going to change the scale to 5, 5, and then we'll go 0.5. And then I'm going to change the, let's see, it's this way. So I'm going to change the Y value to 250. That way the edge, the scene object is located at the edge of the platform. So I'm going to grab the rail left and I'm going to make this 2 in the Z. I'm going to do the same for the rail right. And I'm going to just drag it over here. I'm going to drag this over here. And then we'll, just because we'll make this a metal material, so we'll use some of the template materials. So M_metal steel is great for this. And I'll hit this little magnifying glass right here so that it comes up in my viewport or in my content drawer. Then I'll select both of these and apply it with the gray arrow. Awesome. So these are basically, this is the platform. And then in our scene, we're kind of use these little things as like, to make it look like what the elevator is sliding on. So it looks like you are sliding it up rails like this. Awesome. And we're going to grab our base platform and we're going to duplicate it with Control D. And we're going to call this base platform _end. And we're going to drag it and attach it to the end platform location. And we'll move this up 475 units. Actually, I grabbed the wrong thing. We're going to move the end platform location 475. And we're going to select this and we're going to go to the material and we'll type transparent. And we're going to use this again. We're using sort of just default engine stuff right now, so we don't have to make new stuff. But I'm going to select this VRED reference transparent. And this way we'll be able to show in the viewport where the ending location is for the platform. So I'm going to grab the scene and I'm actually going to move it up 25 units. And we should be good. This way we have it just sitting just on top of the grid. So I'll compile and I'll save. All right, now let's add some logic to move the elevator up and down. So we'll go to our event graph and we're going to start by adding a series of variables. In the bottom left, we'll hit our variables plus sign and we'll say starting location. We'll make this a vector. We'll press Control D to duplicate this and make another vector. We'll call this ending location. We'll add a new variable and we're going to call this at start location question mark. This is going to be a Boolean and we are going to Control D to duplicate this Boolean and we'll say move in progress. And then we will add a final variable and this is going to be an actor reference. And this is going to be our podium reference is what we'll call it. And then we'll change this to type actor and we're going to make this an object reference. And so we'll compile and we'll save and then we're going to add the logic for how to make this move. All right. So what we're going to do is on event begin play, we're going to cache the sort of starting status of things and set things as they should be. So we're going to start and we're going to get our start platform location. We're going to say get world location. And then we're going to drag our starting location off into our graph and say set starting location. Drag this in here. We will copy this because we're going to use this in just a second. We're going to grab our end platform location. We're going to drag this on here, drag it into target. And then we will say set ending location. Drag this in here, drag that in there. So in the very beginning, what we're going to do is just sort of cache where we expect the platform to start and end. So I'll press C to have a comment on this, and I'll say cache, start, and end locations. Awesome. Now, at the very beginning, we want to set at start location and move in progress. So I'm going to drag these both out, and we're going to set at start location is true by default, and move in progress is false. So when you make a new Boolean, sometimes it starts as a true, it can be on and off. So just make sure that this is to make sure that we start with the correct values and we can play. And we're going to add some logic right over here. And I'll say soon. We're going to add some stuff over here, and this will come into effect later. And now let's add the blueprint interface logic. So in our class settings, we're going to, under implemented interfaces, go down to add and type BPI underscore button press interaction. This is again the interaction here. This time we're going to use the podium communicate with elevator event. So in our blueprint, I will go into interfaces over here on the left and say, I'm going to right click and hit implement event. And so again, this is when our call button calls to our elevator reference. That's going to be the elevator. And it's going to receive that event, and we're going to then promote. We're going to set the incoming podium reference, which previously in the elevator is self. So we're going to get the proper reference to the elevator, or the call button, which I guess here I just called a podium, but so this is our call button reference. I'll just rename that for clarity. Call button reference. And I'm going to say, okay, is the move in progress? If it's not, then we're going to set move in progress. And we're also going to add some logic right here in just a second, but we're going to wait till the end to do that. So we're going to set move in progress to true. And we are going to then test, are we at the start location? So we'll say get start location. If we are at the start location, we're going to move to the end location. And if we're not at the start location, that means we're at the end location. So we're going to move to the start location. So I'm going to branch here and drag this in there. We're going to add a timeline. So I'll say add timeline. And we'll call this move elevator timeline. I'm going to drag true into play from start and false into reverse from end. Now we'll double click to open up our move elevator timeline. In the top left, we will create a track. I'm going to say add float track. We'll call this move contribution. I'm going to right click here and say add key to curve. I'm going to do the same again. Doesn't matter where, because we're going to reset the values here. So for the first one, I'm going to say time is 0, value is 0. The second, we'll say time is 4, value is 1. And so I'm just going to say basically any elevator right now is going to move from its start to its end in 4 seconds. And then I'm going to change the length of the timeline to 4 to account for that. And then I like when, right now it's linear keys, but I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard, which is the same as changing it to auto interpolate. So it sets the auto tangents, which just makes it a little bit smoother. So I prefer that, and that's what we're going to do. So I'll save this, and then we'll see now that we have created that, this float value can come out as this move contribution. And we're going to then drag out here and say lerp vector. And we're going to then linear interpolate the location of the scene. So I guess actually let's rename this platform underscore root. So we're going to move the platform root, which is what the platform is attached to, between the start location and the end location. And we'll grab this and we're going to say set world location. We're going to bring this return value into here on the update. So as this progresses across the timeline, it will continue to set the world location while the timeline is active. And then at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to, once it's completed, we will set move in progress to be false. And we're going to figure out, based on the direction of the timeline, let's see, select whether or not we're going forwards or backwards. So I'm going to set then the at start location. We'll drag this value in here so it changes those to booleans, and we're going to check this to assign that value. So I'll drag this in here. And this again basically means if we're playing the timeline forwards at the end, then that means once it's completed, it is no longer at the start location. So it would be false, and it's the opposite for backwards. So awesome. This is good, but we're going to add just one more thing before we test this out. And actually, let's go ahead and test it right now. All right, so we will drag an elevator into our scene. So I'm going to drag my elevator, and I'm going to drag my call button, and we'll see right now that I haven't exposed the variable, the call button, for a referenced elevator. So I'm going to go into my call button. I'm going to go to my elevator reference, and I'll click this little eyeball button. Once I do that, and I compile, we'll see that I can now add a reference to an actor in the level. So I'll use the eyedropper. I'm going to select my moving elevator. I will play from here. We'll see that my icon goes away. When I enter and exit the volume, it should hide. And then when I press the E key, it's going to start moving towards the destination. So let's make some edits. First, we want to make sure that in our elevator, our end platform is hidden in game. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to say hidden in game true. I'm also going to type collision on my base platform, which is the mesh. It is not going to be allowed to generate overlap events, and we're going to set the collision presets to no collision, and can character step on is no. This way it cannot be overlapped. It is just simply sort of an editor thing where I can see, once I compile it, that it is actually, so hidden in game should be on this guy. So I set the scene component to hidden in game. We're going to set the mesh to hidden in game. So once I hit that button to true, if I press the G key in my viewport, we'll see it turn on and off things that are expected to be viewed during game. So that will disappear, which is great. And now let's add just a little bit more functionality. So what we want to do now is we're going to add one layer of functionality in our call button. So in our call button, we are going to add the event elevator communicate with podium. So I'm going to right click and say implement event. And we're going to call back up when we start and when we finish from the elevator. So we've set this reference here. And once we've started to move the elevator, we want to get our call button reference, and we want to call the function elevator communicate with podium. So I'll drag off and I'll say elevator communicate with podium. And it's going to be this one right up here. And we'll make sure that target goes in here. So the call button goes in the target. And once we've started, in progress is true. And then we'll do the same at the end. We'll copy and we'll paste with Control-C, Control-V. We'll say is in progress is false there at the end. Awesome. Still one more thing to do up here, but we'll do that in just a little bit. Now let's go back to our call button. And we will add just a little bit of logic. So we're going to grab allow interaction, and we'll say set allow interaction. We are going to pull off here and create a not Boolean, which basically gives us the opposite of whatever value is coming through. And then we are going to grab our billboard, which is our little sprite, and we will say set visibility. Drag in here. And then we are going to drag this same value right into there, and we are good to go. So now basically when the elevator is moving, we won't have access and we won't see this visual. So it doesn't miscommunicate any ideas. So compile and I'll save. And let's go back and test this now. So I'm going to also make sure that, let's check out just one thing here. I want to make sure that my start platform location is at 25 as well, because I basically want this to sit on the floor, and 25 units is the middle of this 50 unit thickness slab. So I'm going to press play and we should see this working very smoothly now. So I'm going to go up, I'm going to press E. We'll see it slowly rise to the end. And then once it's done, the icon pops back up. And if I press E again, it will go back down. So that's awesome. So now let's test one thing. And this is going to be just one more bit of logic we're going to add. Let's say I want to attach this elevator button to the elevator. Right now, if I were to grab this and attach it to the moving elevator, so I'm going to grab this in my outliner, attach it here, we're actually going to see that it's attached to the root, which is different than being attached to the moving object. So when I press E, it sort of slides to the ground there, which isn't what I want. So in my moving elevator, in my event graph, so it's this guy, the elevator. In my event graph, what I'm going to do is add just a tiny bit of logic where I'm going to grab, I'm going to say get attached actors. And I will say for each loop, drag this in here, soon is now. I'm going to say attach actor to component. So the target is the object that's attached. The parent is going to be, actually it's going to be the platform root. So I'm going to drag this out here, set this as the parent. And then we'll say for the location, keep world, rotation, keep world. And we are all good. So now I can see that when I press play and I press the E key, it's going to be attached and move along with the elevator. So this is great if I wanted to, attach the button to the elevator as it moves. And so now let's set up just one additional scenario. Or actually, let's set up a few. So, here, what these are over here are really just static meshes. So you can create these just by scaling some cubes. But so again, this is the sort of sliding rail, but using the system we've created, we can also move these elevators sideways or even at a diagonal. So I'm going to create this sort of rail right here. And let's go now with our G key. We're going to show the box, and I'm going to grab my end platform location. Make sure I have my snapping on just because it makes it easier to move this to the proper location. I'm going to move this down so it matches the location here. And I'm going to move this all the way over here. I'm going to scale this over like that. And then I'm going to lift this up. And I'll add a little platform here. So let's imagine we have a pit of doom and we are riding an elevator sort of like up here. Or we're riding this platform across the pit. Once I add a call button, I can reference this elevator. I can attach it to the moving elevator I've created up here in the outliner. And I can slide across. And this would also work if I was over here and let's say there was 2 call buttons and I need to, so I'm already referenced here to this elevator. Let's say I start over here and I say, I can see that the elevator I need is over there. I can, let's detach this from the elevator. I can approach, press the E key, we'll see my elevator sliding over. And now I can approach this and use this platform. Awesome. Well, that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more Unreal Engine 5 content. Have a great day.